What if one forgotten dollar coin in your drawer has a story that millions of people never notice? Welcome back to Change Your Life. Today, we're revealing two Susan B. Anthony dollar coins that continue to fascinate collectors across the United States. 1999, P. Susan B. Anthony dollar. 1979, D. Susan B. Anthony dollar. These iconic dollar coins feature the historic Apollo 11 mission insignia reverse design and were struck in a durable copper-nickel-clad composition. At first glance, they look like ordinary, worn coins, but appearances can be deceiving. In this video, you'll discover the history behind these coins, the details collectors examine first, the minting quirks that make certain examples stand out, and why some heavily circulated dollars attract far more attention than others. The most surprising part? Some of the biggest collector discoveries have come from coins that looked completely ordinary until someone noticed one tiny detail. So before you spend that old Susan B. Anthony dollar or leave it forgotten in a coin jar, stay with me until the very end. Because the final coin on today's list has a twist that most people never expect. Now, let's reveal coin number one. Have you ever reached into your pocket, pulled out a small dollar coin, and assumed it wasn't worth a second glance? Maybe it looked scratched, dull, or covered with years of wear. Maybe it was tossed into a drawer because it seemed too ordinary to matter. But sometimes, the most overlooked coins tell the most remarkable stories. And one of those stories belongs to the 1999 P. Susan B. Anthony dollar, a coin that marked the final chapter of one of the most ambitious experiments in modern American coinage. By the late 1990s, the United States was preparing for a new era. Technology was advancing rapidly. Businesses relied heavily on vending machines, transit systems needed durable dollar coins, and the U.S. Mint faced an unexpected challenge. Supplies of circulating dollar coins were running low. Although the Susan B. Anthony dollar had largely disappeared from public attention after the early 1980s, millions of stored coins had gradually been released into commerce. As demand increased, the Mint made a surprising decision. Instead of waiting for the next dollar coin design, it restarted production of the Susan B. Anthony dollar for one final year. That decision gave birth to the 1999 P. Susan B. Anthony dollar. The P. Mint mark tells us this coin was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, one of America's oldest and most productive minting facilities. Philadelphia had produced countless historic coins throughout U.S. history, and in 1999 it once again became responsible for striking millions of these dollar coins before an entirely new chapter would begin with the Sacagawea dollar the following year. Unlike many collectors assume, the 1999 issue was never intended to celebrate an anniversary or introduce a redesigned coin. It existed because of necessity. Transit authorities, vending machine companies, and other industries still depended on dollar coins for daily operations. Paper dollars simply couldn't replace every mechanical system, and existing supplies were no longer enough. The Mint needed a practical solution, and fast. As a result, approximately 29.6 million circulation-quality Susan B. Anthony dollars were struck at Philadelphia during 1999. Compared with many modern circulation coins, that number seems large. But when compared with the enormous production figures of 1979, it represents a much smaller and more controlled mintage. That difference alone has made the 1999 issue an important date within the series. The Susan B. Anthony dollar belongs to the modern small dollar program introduced by the United States Mint to replace the much larger Eisenhower dollar. The earlier Eisenhower coin honored President Dwight D. Eisenhower and America's achievements in space, but many Americans considered it too large and inconvenient for everyday use. Officials believed a smaller dollar coin would encourage greater public acceptance. Unfortunately, the solution created another problem. The new dollar was only slightly larger than the quarter and carried a similar silver-colored appearance. Although it featured an 11-sided inner border intended to help people distinguish it by touch, many Americans still confused it with the quarter. That confusion followed the coin throughout its entire circulation life, including the 1999 production. Looking closely at the obverse reveals one of the most historically significant portraits ever placed on an American circulating coin. Susan B. Anthony was not a president, military hero, or fictional symbol. She was a real person whose determination helped transform American democracy. Born in 1820, Susan B. Anthony devoted much of her life to fighting for equal rights, especially women's voting rights. During the 19th century, women in the United States could not vote in national elections. Anthony traveled across the country delivering speeches, organizing campaigns, and challenging laws she believed were unjust. Her work often faced criticism, ridicule, and even legal consequences, but she continued speaking because she believed political equality belonged to everyone. One of the most famous moments of her life came in 1872 when she cast a vote in a presidential election despite laws prohibiting women from voting. She was arrested, tried, and fined. Although she refused to pay the fine, her action became one of the defining moments in the American suffrage movement. Decades after her death, the 19th Amendment granted women the constitutional right to vote in 1920, fulfilling a goal she had spent her lifetime pursuing. Because of that extraordinary legacy, the United States selected Susan B. Anthony as the face of its new dollar coin. The portrait was created by chief engraver Frank Gasparo, who carefully based his work on historical photographs while presenting Anthony with a confident, determined expression. Around the portrait appear the inscriptions "Liberty," "In God We Trust," 13 stars representing the original colonies, the date 1999, and the Philadelphia P mint mark. Turn the coin over, and another remarkable story appears. The reverse displays an American eagle descending toward the moon while carrying an olive branch. This design was adapted from the official insignia of the Apollo 11 mission, humanity's first successful moon landing in July 1969. When astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped onto the lunar surface, they forever changed the history of exploration. Millions watched around the world as science achieved something once thought impossible. Rather than showing astronauts directly, the mission patch used an eagle because it represented the United States. The olive branch symbolized peaceful exploration rather than military conquest. That same symbolism carried over to the Susan B. Anthony dollar, linking everyday American currency with one of the nation's greatest technological achievements. Every time someone spent one of these coins, they unknowingly carried a reminder of both America's struggle for equal rights and its determination to reach beyond Earth. But despite those powerful stories, most 1999 Susan B. Anthony dollars entered circulation with little excitement. They quickly disappeared into vending machines, transit systems, casino operations, and everyday commerce. Many became scratched, nicked, stained, and heavily worn within only a few years. Ironically, those ordinary-looking circulated examples are exactly the coins many collectors search through today, hoping to discover something unusual hiding beneath decades of everyday use. And that's where the story becomes even more interesting, because once a 1999 piece Susan B. Anthony dollar leaves the mint, its condition begins to shape not only its appearance, but sometimes its collector value as well. The moment a 1999 piece Susan B. Anthony dollar entered circulation, its journey became completely unpredictable. One coin might spend years inside a bank vault before reaching the public, while another could pass through thousands of hands in only a few months. It might ride through subway stations, vending machines, laundromats, grocery stores, casinos, or cash registers. Every exchange added another tiny mark, another scratch, another layer of history. That's why heavily circulated examples often look dramatically different from the brilliant coins that originally left the Philadelphia Mint. On worn pieces, Susan B. Anthony's portrait begins to lose its sharp definition. Fine hair strands gradually blend together. The cheek and jaw become smoother, and the highest points of the design slowly flatten from years of contact with other coins. The lettering remains readable, but repeated friction softens its edges. The reverse tells the same story. The eagle's feathers lose detail first, especially around the wings and chest. Small texture lines on the moon become harder to see, while the fields surrounding the design develop countless tiny contact marks from decades of circulation. To many people, that kind of wear makes a coin look old and unimportant. To experienced collectors, however, wear tells a story. It reveals that the coin actually served the purpose for which it was created. Every scratch represents another transaction. Every smooth surface reflects years of movement through the American economy. Although heavy circulation usually lowers collector value, it also proves the coin became part of everyday history instead of remaining forgotten inside mint storage. Of course, condition still matters. Most 1999 P. Susan B. Anthony dollars found in pocket change today are circulated examples worth approximately their face value or only slightly more. Depending on demand and overall condition, many sell for around $1 to $3. These are estimates, not guarantees, because collector interest changes over time. Coins preserved in uncirculated condition tell a very different story. An MS-63 example usually retains much of its original mint luster with only light contact marks. By MS-64 and MS-65, the surfaces appear cleaner, the strike looks stronger, and the overall eye appeal improves noticeably. Many collectors consider these grades an excellent balance between affordability and quality. Move into MS-66 or MS-67, and surviving examples become much more difficult to locate. These premium coins often display brilliant luster, crisp lettering, and very few distractions under magnification. Depending on certification, market demand, and eye appeal, values may range from around $30 to more than $100. Exceptional registry quality pieces can sell for considerably higher during competitive auctions. Again, these are estimates rather than guaranteed prices. Then comes the category that creates the most excitement: mint errors. Unlike ordinary circulation wear, mint errors happen before a coin ever leaves the press. One of the best-known varieties is the doubled die. Here, parts of the design appear slightly doubled because of the way the die was prepared. Under magnification, certain letters or numbers may show clear separation instead of a single sharp image. Another possibility is an off-center strike. Instead of landing perfectly beneath the dies, the blank planchet shifts slightly during striking. Part of the design is missing while a blank crescent remains visible around one side of the coin. Wrong planchet errors are even more unusual. In these cases, a Susan B. Anthony dollar is accidentally struck on a metal blank intended for another denomination. The result may show unusual color, incorrect weight, or even a different diameter. Die cracks appear as raised lines crossing the design because the steel die itself begins to fracture after repeated use. Some are tiny, while others grow into dramatic features stretching across the coin. Die clashes occur when the obverse and reverse dies strike each other without a blank planchet between them. That accidental impact transfers faint design elements onto the opposite die, creating unusual ghost-like impressions on later coins. Broad strikes happen when the retaining collar fails to hold the planchet firmly during striking. Without that support, the metal spreads farther than normal, producing a wider coin with an incomplete or weak rim. Although genuine mint errors are uncommon, they remain one of the biggest reasons collectors carefully inspect ordinary-looking dollar coins instead of spending them immediately. If you discover a 1999 P. Susan B. Anthony dollar, there are several simple checks you can perform at home. Begin with the weight. A standard circulation coin should weigh approximately 8.1 grams. Significant differences may deserve closer investigation. Next, examine the edge. Because the coin is copper-nickel clad over a pure copper core, a narrow copper-colored stripe should be visible around the edge. Inspect the rim carefully. Weak or uneven rims sometimes indicate striking abnormalities. Rotate the coin vertically. The reverse should appear correctly aligned with the obverse. Any unusual rotation could indicate a striking error worth additional research. Finally, use a magnifying glass or jeweler's loupe to inspect the lettering, date, mint mark, and Apollo 11 reverse. Small doubling, die cracks, or other unusual features are often invisible without magnification. But perhaps the greatest value of the 1999 P. Susan B. Anthony dollar cannot be measured by price guides alone. It represents the closing chapter of a bold experiment. It reminds us that even carefully planned ideas do not always succeed as expected. Yet failure does not erase historical importance. Instead, it often makes history even more fascinating. Millions of Americans ignored this coin while it circulated through their hands. Today, collectors look at that same dollar with entirely different eyes. And before this story can truly be understood, we have to travel back to the very beginning, to 1979, the year the Susan B. Anthony Dollar made its historic debut and forever changed the conversation about America's $1 coin. If the 1999 Susan B. Anthony Dollar marked the end of the story, then 1979 is where everything truly began. Long before collectors searched bank rolls for hidden varieties or examined worn dollar coins under magnification, the United States Mint was preparing to introduce a coin it believed would change everyday commerce forever. The year was 1979, and expectations were enormous. For decades, the United States had relied primarily on the $1 bill for daily transactions. Large dollar coins, like the Eisenhower dollar, existed, but most Americans found them too bulky and inconvenient to carry. Government officials believed a smaller, lighter dollar coin could solve that problem while lasting much longer than paper currency. That idea became the Susan B. Anthony dollar. Produced at the Philadelphia Mint with the P. Mint mark, this coin represented a major change in modern American coinage. It was smaller than the Eisenhower dollar, lighter in the pocket, and manufactured using a copper-nickel-clad composition surrounding a pure copper core. The Mint hoped these improvements would encourage millions of Americans to adopt the coin for everyday purchases. The launch attracted nationwide attention. Banks received fresh shipments. Newspapers reported on the new dollar. Television programs discussed the historic design. Collectors lined up to obtain examples directly from financial institutions, while many Americans were simply curious to see the country's newest circulating coin. Unlike previous dollar coins that honored presidents or symbolic figures, this one featured Susan B. Anthony, a woman whose lifelong determination helped reshape American democracy. Born in Massachusetts in 1820, Anthony devoted decades of her life to the fight for equal rights. During the 19th century, women had little political influence and were denied the right to vote. Anthony believed democracy could never be complete while half the population remained excluded from elections. She traveled thousands of miles by train and carriage, delivering speeches in towns and cities across America. Sometimes audiences welcomed her message. Other times they rejected it completely. Yet she refused to stop. One of her boldest acts came during the presidential election of 1872. Knowing that women were legally prohibited from voting, Susan B. Anthony entered a polling place and cast her ballot anyway. She was arrested. Her trial became national news. Although she was found guilty and fined, Anthony refused to pay, arguing that citizens should never be punished for exercising fundamental rights. Her protest inspired future generations of activists and became one of the defining moments of the women's suffrage movement. She passed away in 1906, never living to witness the adoption of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which guaranteed American women the constitutional right to vote. When her portrait appeared on the Susan B. Anthony dollar in 1979, it represented far more than a design choice. It acknowledged decades of courage, persistence, and social change. Chief engraver Frank Gasparo carefully created the portrait using historical photographs as references. The result presents Anthony with a determined expression that reflects the strength of her character rather than romanticized symbolism. Around her portrait appear 13 stars representing the original colonies, along with the inscriptions Liberty, In God We Trust, the date 1979, and the Philadelphia Mint mark. Turning the coin over reveals another story entirely. The reverse features the famous eagle descending toward the lunar surface while carrying an olive branch. This design originated from the official insignia of the Apollo 11 mission. In July 1969, astronauts successfully landed on the moon for the first time in human history. The achievement represented years of scientific research, engineering innovation, and extraordinary determination. Rather than placing astronauts on the mission patch, NASA selected the bald eagle, a symbol recognized around the world as representing the United States. The olive branch carried by the eagle emphasized that the mission represented peaceful exploration, not conquest. By placing that same design on the Susan B. Anthony dollar, the Mint connected two remarkable chapters of American history. One side honored a pioneer of civil rights. The other celebrated one of humanity's greatest scientific achievements. Few circulating coins have ever combined such different stories on a single piece of metal. When production began, the Philadelphia Mint struck hundreds of millions of 1979 Susan B. Anthony dollars, reflecting enormous confidence in the coin's future. Officials believed Americans would quickly embrace the smaller dollar and gradually reduce dependence on paper currency. The numbers were impressive. More than 360 million circulation-quality coins were produced at Philadelphia alone during 1979, making it the largest mintage of the entire series. Additional coins were also struck at Denver and San Francisco, creating one of the biggest dollar coin releases in modern U.S. history. Everything suggested success. But once these coins left the mint and entered the hands of the public, reality turned out to be very different. The very feature that made the coin convenient, its compact size, would soon become the reason millions of Americans rejected it. As the first 1979 Susan B. Anthony dollars began moving through banks, grocery stores, restaurants, and transit systems, public opinion formed surprisingly fast. The mint had expected people to welcome a lighter, more practical dollar coin. Instead, many Americans found themselves making the same mistake over and over again. They confused it with a quarter. Although the dollar coin was slightly larger and featured an 11-sided inner border, its silver-colored appearance and similar size caused constant mix-ups during everyday transactions. Cashiers handed out the wrong change. Customers accidentally spent dollar coins as quarters, and many people simply preferred carrying the familiar $1 bill instead. It wasn't that the Susan B. Anthony dollar lacked historical importance. It simply struggled to fit comfortably into everyday habits. As months passed, millions of these coins entered circulation. Some remained in bank vaults, while countless others traveled from pocket to pocket, cash drawer to cash drawer, collecting small scratches and signs of use along the way. Today, heavily circulated 1979 P examples are the ones most collectors encounter first. On these well-used coins, Susan B. Anthony's portrait often appears noticeably smoother than when it left the mint. The highest points of her hair lose definition, the cheek becomes flatter, and tiny details around the ear gradually disappear. Years of contact with other coins also create numerous bag marks, nicks, and fine scratches across the surface. The reverse changes just as much. The eagle's feathers become less distinct, the lunar surface appears smoother, and some lettering may lose its sharp edges. Even so, the design remains instantly recognizable, reminding collectors that this coin spent years fulfilling the purpose for which it was created. Condition plays an enormous role in collector value. Most heavily circulated 1979 P. Susan B. Anthony dollars are worth close to face value, typically around $1 to $3, depending on overall appearance and collector demand. These values are estimates, not guarantees, and can change with market conditions. Coins preserved in MS-63 to MS-65 uncirculated condition generally command higher premiums because they retain original mint luster, stronger details, and fewer contact marks. Depending on quality, these examples often sell in the approximate range of $5 to $30. At MS-66 through MS-68, finding attractive examples becomes increasingly difficult. Coins in these grades may reach $50, $100, or several $100s, particularly when certified by respected grading services and displaying exceptional eye appeal. Again, these are estimates, not guarantees. While grade matters, mint errors often generate the greatest excitement among collectors. One variety to watch for is a doubled die, where parts of the lettering or design appear doubled because of the die preparation process. Under magnification, the effect may be visible on dates, inscriptions, or other design elements. An off-center strike occurs when the blank planchet is not correctly positioned beneath the dies. The result is a coin with part of the design missing and a blank crescent-shaped area around the edge. A wrong planchet error happens when the design is struck onto a blank intended for another denomination. These mistakes are uncommon and often attract significant collector interest. A die crack appears as a raised line across the coin's surface after the steel die begins developing fractures from extended use. A die clash results when the obverse and reverse dies strike one another without a planchet between them, leaving faint transferred impressions that later appear on coins. A broad strike occurs when the retaining collar fails to hold the blank during striking, allowing the metal to spread beyond its normal diameter and creating a weak or incomplete rim. If you have a 1979 P. Susan B. Anthony dollar at home, Taking a closer look costs nothing and can be an enjoyable part of collecting. Begin by checking the weight, which should be approximately 8.1 grams. Next, inspect the edge, where the copper core should be visible between the outer copper-nickel layers. Look carefully at the rim for unusual shapes or weakness. Rotate the coin to verify proper alignment between the obverse and reverse. Finally, use a magnifying glass to inspect the date, mint mark, lettering, and Apollo 11 reverse for possible doubling, die cracks, or other unusual features. Most coins will simply be honest survivors of everyday circulation. A few may hold something more. Regardless of value, the 1979 Susan B. Anthony dollar occupies a unique place in American history. It honored a woman whose determination helped expand voting rights, celebrated the achievement of the Apollo 11 moon landing, and represented the mint's ambitious effort to modernize the nation's currency. Although it never achieved the widespread public acceptance officials had hoped for, its legacy continues through collectors who appreciate both its historical significance and its fascinating varieties. Sometimes, the most memorable coins are not the ones that transform the economy. They're the ones that tell the richest stories. And if one of these overlooked dollars is resting in your pocket, coin jar, or an old family collection, it may be worth taking one more careful look. Even when its value is modest, the history it carries is truly priceless.